Hello, welcome into Pax What She Said Live. I am one of your co-hosts, Perri Goldstein. I almost said Maggie Loney because you always host Pax What She Said. I'm not Maggie Loney. I'm Perri Goldstein. I'm joined by Maggie Loney. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. The Packers are the 1 seed. They have locked up the 1 seed a week early. Week 18 does not count for them. It counts for everybody else. It's so fun. That must be so nice. They're like probably at home on their couches like
Matt LaFleur does not know what a wild card weekend is.
He doesn't. He has never played in one. There's so much to talk about. I have not been drinking. For those in the comments, I'm dead sober. I enjoyed the game because it was a beatdown. It was like the beatdown that we've been waiting for all season. Came at the perfect moment, I'd say. There's a lot to cover, right, between the Vikings game, the upcoming Lions game, a bunch of records that were broken or could be broken in the coming week. And then, of course, the NFC playoff picture. So we're going to get to all of it.
Yeah.
First, how are you feeling about the Packers in general? 1 seed, feeling post Vikings game?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of feel the same way that a lot of the team did, where each week, like after the Browns game, so many of the players were saying that they haven't played a complete game yet, and when they do, and then it was fair to question, like, okay, well, we're in week 17, almost week 16 at that point. There's getting closer and closer to you're running out of time to play a complete game. And then I thought their response to the Vikings, and yes, obviously it wasn't, Kirk Cousins, but the way that they shut down the run game, the way special teams performed, I think this was their most complete game of the season. And it came at exactly the right time, regardless of now what happens against the Lions. This is a team that I think is riding the momentum into a really important stretch. Only undefeated team at home this season, and now 2 home playoff games away from a Super Bowl appearance.
Yes, I love that as well. I noticed that they are the only team that has not lost a game at home. I mean, I imagine it's very, very difficult to walk into Lambeau in general and beat the Packers. And then they have this going into the postseason. I agree. It was a very complete game. Again, it was Sean Mannion, but you can only play who's in front of you. And like you mentioned, they still have Dalvin Cook. They still have Justin Jefferson. They still have that defense with Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, et cetera. So it wasn't like they were playing like a bad team. And to be quite honest with you, like, is Kirk even that great? No. So it was awesome to see. I think my biggest takeaway was just like foot on the pedal the whole way. It didn't matter what the score was. Obviously, they put Jordan Love in at the end, and that was awesome for him to get some live game reps that he probably would have never had. And he's probably going to play next week as well. So great for him. But while Aaron Rodgers was in through to the fourth quarter, it was all gas, making it 37-10, even when it didn't really need to. They didn't really need that last touchdown. Let's talk about Aaron Rodgers for a bit because he's the clear MVP favorite. I think it's not really a question. I can see how Tom Brady or maybe Joe Burrow at this point are getting into the mix, Cooper Kupp, Jonathan Taylor, but if you look at betting markets, which all of a sudden this is what we talk about, Aaron Rodgers is the clear far and away favorite. This would be his 4th MVP of his career, back-to-back MVPs for a guy that kind of had a slower start to the season, but since the bye week, basically, since he came back from COVID, I would say he's been lights out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the elements of his game has always been protecting the football, and it's something that the Packers have done so well this season. Going into, the game against the Vikings, they were number 1 in the league in turnover differential, forcing a ton of turnovers and protecting the football on offense. But, just 2 interceptions week 1, you're like, okay, this is very uncharacteristic. 2 interceptions since and 35 touchdowns is just it's unprecedented. And I think he has 36 touchdowns against the rest of the NFC North in his last 2 seasons and 0 picks. Like, those numbers just speak for themselves, especially if you look at, kind of the way that things were trending in 2018 when McCarthy got fired, and even the first season with Matt LaFleur. Like, there were some growing pains in that offense and learning that scheme. So for him to pick it up and for LaFleur to have kind of tailored the offense to something that just really fits his skill set has been so impressive.
So impressive. And he's gotten better over the course of the season, right? Like his deep ball was not really hitting the first half of the season that well. He's hitting those shots now easily. Obviously, I think he missed one to MVS this weekend, but he's not going to be 100%. And even with the toe injury, whatever the toe injury may be, if you watch Manning Cast on Monday night, there was some joking there about it. But I think all in all, he's playing like well within scheme with Matt LaFleur. He's getting the ball out fast. He just looks really, really sharp. And yeah, he's the most accurate thrower of the football, I think, ever. It's hard to find anybody who takes care of the ball as much as he is. And even when he was having those down years, like you mentioned, I mean, there was a lot of throwaways. And now you're seeing that no throwaways, just completions for old Aaron Rodgers. Really, really fun to watch him play at such a high level, even at 38, especially with that dip. So kudos to Matt LaFleur because it's definitely scheme oriented.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you can see too, especially, at home, Sunday Night Football against the Vikings, like they dialed it up. We saw a lot more pony. And the thing I like about the way that kind of the offense is trending as well is Devontae had a stellar night, even with, defenses kind of scheming around him. But there's always somebody that steps up. Allen Lazard the last couple weeks has looked really good. And if they get just an iota of production from some of these other guys, knowing who Devontae is, knowing who they have in Aaron Jones
Yeah.
and AJ Dillon, like those role players, a couple weeks ago, Aaron Rodgers was talking about the idea of role players having like this negative connotation because you think that means that you can only do one thing. But everybody on the Packers roster does their one thing so well that it really does kind of become something that you take ownership of. And it's not like, oh, I'm, relegated to this one role. It's like, no, Allen Lazard is the goon. Like he wears it and then he gets those opportunities. So it's just been really impressive to see, each phase of the game stepping up, especially, I guess, on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this offense is so fun, and you got a connection that Aaron Rodgers has with Davante Adams that's unlike any we've literally ever seen. Now, statistically, that's accurate. It's not even like a figment of Packers fans like speech. It's statistically true, and I find it's just going to be very, very hard for teams to cover Davante. I'm waiting now for the rest of this NFC picture to fall into place. I know you and I are going to dive in this a little bit more and later on in the show, but I mean, if it ends up being teams that the Packers have already played, I think that works to their advantage. Now, we talked about this. I think it was God, we talk a lot. So it was recently, but it was about the way that the Ravens covered Davante. And I'm definitely curious to see if some of that gets taken into the playoffs. Not that I think that he can't beat double teams because we watch him beat double, even triple teams sometimes. But again, like you mentioned, you get all those other players, whether it's an Allen Lazard type game or an MVS game or both running backs who looked stellar against the Vikings. I think that this offense can score points regardless. I do want to touch on the running backs because, again, I think the night was highlighted by some really, really incredible Rodgers to Davante Adams throws and catches, as always. But I think the run game was really like on display with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon having really nice nights. And you mentioned it, we get that pony package, which you and I love, and I think adds like a ton of wrinkles into this team. And we talked about, actually, we had, if you didn't listen to our episode this past week, we had Eric Eager on from PFF, which was really, really fun and interesting, especially because I think we see the game on two sides of the same coin a little bit. And we talked about running backs, and if the run game isn't necessarily working that well, and there's definitely been weeks for the Packers where the O-line is not run blocking well enough, or the defense is just sniffing out the run. Like, how do you get those playmakers involved? Because AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones are huge weapons for this Packers offense. And then you see it this week, right, where you get them both on the field and create mismatches using both of them on the field.
Yeah, and I mean, both backs obviously eclipsing now 1,000 yards all-purpose on the season, which was a lot of fun. AJ Dillon talked about it as being something that they kind of alluded to in preseason. Like, they did the math. I think they ended up needing like 57 yards a game each or something to hit that 1,000-yard mark. And, for both of them to do that, has been really impressive. It hasn't happened, obviously, for the Packers since 1980. I think this is only the fourth tandem to do that. And, you saw AJ Dillon talked about it in his presser when he was in his Carhartts and nothing else that, this is the Lambeau atmosphere. And I think there's kind of a mentality that goes into the running game in the cold winter months. And you kind of get the sense that the way that the Packers played and the energy and the stadium last season for the NFC, unfortunately, the NFC Championship game was not at capacity. So I think there's like this added juice now knowing that they're going to get to play in front of 77,000 fans instead of, the 10,000 or
Yeah.
however many that were there. Yeah.
And I think the home field advantage is not necessarily a factor for a lot of different teams, but it certainly is a factor at Lambeau. I feel like I can say that now that I've actually been to a game there. I mean, it's real, right? And yes, I'm sure for the playoffs there are going to be some teams, their fans travel well, but at the end of the day, like that is going to be all Packers fans. And they actually talked about it on the broadcast, which I thought was really interesting. It's maybe the second or third time I've actually heard the broadcasters talk about the way Matt LaFleur interacts with the crowd during the game. And you see him every week. I mean, obviously everyone in this chat and watching this video right now watch every single game. So we see, right, that LaFleur is hyping everybody up on third down when the Packers are on defense. He's like trying to quiet down the team when they're on offense, and it's changed the atmosphere at Lambeau. I mean, you hear tons of stories about like the crowd not being that involved or people not standing up. And I think like, again, you want to look at LaFleur for his play calling and his leadership style and all the things he's changed in the locker room. Like, let's look at like what he's done on game day for this team and getting the crowd to be, a positive factor for the Packers.
Yeah, I mean, even the last couple seasons with like the jumbotrons and the kind of video messaging, I think it started probably in 2019 is the last time I can really remember it, which was, of course, Matt LaFleur's first season. But having Z and Preston and even like Eric Stokes was in some with the rookies, talking about like when you should be quiet or hyping people up. When we were at the game, the Christmas game, my sister-in-law is like, I don't know, like 5 feet. She's pretty tiny. And she looked at the guys behind her who were Packer fans and was like, sorry guys, just so you know, I'm probably gonna have to stand most of the game. And they were like, you know what? You stand as much as you want. And it was just such like a contrast from what we're used to seeing. And she really did end up standing the entire game. And we all did. And it made it worth it.
I don't think we sat down for a second at the Lions game. And I know at the divisional game, we are not going to be sitting down, especially because it's probably going to be freezing. I'm going to have to like jump
You're
around.
not going to want to sit on the bleachers anyway.
So let's talk a little bit more about this Vikings game before we switch over. I haven't done my rewatch. I'm going to admit that right now. But I'm not sure really how much there is to rewatch just because it was such a beatdown. So before we flip to defense, like give me your like biggest takeaways from this Packers offense.
Yeah, I think I did do my rewatch today, and I think the biggest thing was really just that, it was a really dominant performance on both sides of the ball. It was frustrating, of course, in the beginning for the Packers to get into the red zone so many times and only have 3 points to show for it. I think finishing drives, especially in the playoffs, is going to really matter there. But special teams looked really good. It was nice to see Mason get as many opportunities as he did to kick field goals and extra points and have like a really clean game, even with some of the botched holds early. But yeah, I think for the offense, it's really just finishing drives because, even having those opportunities that they missed, they put up 37 points. If they had even if they kicked a field goal, that's a 40 burger. You're looking at maybe 40, 45 points that this offense is able to put up against, the Vikings run defense has not been great this season, but as a whole, they have some really good players. And I think it was another good thing for them to trend in the right direction.
Yep. I agree. I think you just fix some of those red zone woes and they're virtually unstoppable, especially because against better teams in the playoffs, like you're going to want as many points as possible. Yeah. I'm definitely curious. This is something I guess I'll be watching for as we move forward, like Matt LaFleur's aggressiveness, because he's been fairly aggressive on fourth down. And again, you want those points, but his decision-making on whether to kick field goals, like you said, or go for it on fourth down when they're in the red zone, I think is going to be really interesting to watch. Do you have a response to that?
No, but I mean, one Big B's in the chat. So, hey, Big B, we hope you're feeling better. And then on the flip side of that, though, I was just going to mention that, on the defensive side, it was as for as dominant as the offensive was, I think the defense just balled out. And I know obviously it's Sean Mannion and it's not Kirk Cousins, but the way that Justin Jefferson torched this team the
Yeah.
first time they met at US Bank, it showed a lot. Eric Stokes had a really good game. Um, I thought Shannon Sullivan played a really good game. Rashawn Gary and Preston both over 9 sacks on the season, kind of competing to see if they can both get to double digits next week. But I think after that first field goal, the Vikings didn't even get a first down until late in the third quarter.
Yeah.
So, it was just a really, really stout performance for that defense.
I feel very similarly. And again, it doesn't really matter who's under center. Like the Packers have had a shaky, I guess, couple of weeks. And I say that with the questioning tone of voice just because they still held Baker to 22 points, and they picked him off 4 times, but those games were closer than you would have liked. And I think this type of, like you said, very shut down defensive performance is exactly the kind of momentum you want heading into the playoffs. Like you want that, just that big beat down type of game. I think I've been thinking about this like so much from like a mentality perspective, right? Especially for another team to walk into Lambeau Field against this team that's on fire, against the MVP, against the number 1 receiver in the league. The one question going into this week was, where does this defense fall? Like they've been pretty middle of the road statistically all season, but like, can they really shut down other opposing teams? And like this week we saw again, yes, they are fully capable of doing that. And it'll be against, we've said it 1,000 times, better quarterbacks, but you get Devontae Campbell and Chris Barnes for making tackles everywhere. That middle of the field is fully covered in a way that I don't think we've seen in years. Eric Stokes pretty much locked up Justin Jefferson, right? And yeah, you get Preston and Rashawn, who are now both potentially going to hit double-digit sacks. They're covered like every phase of the defense, like all three areas. And with the idea that I think at this point in my mind, the only player that I feel like the Packers are going to get back on defense is going to be Jair, and that just makes them even better. Especially you get King a little bit in that like dime role you saw with Barry.
I thought he played well there.
I thought he played really well there too. And then, you can rotate Jair in because you do have Rasul Douglas and Shannon Sullivan and Eric Stokes who have been playing quite well. I think the Packers can go into this playoffs with the 3 of them and be fine. And then you add in, your all pro corner, and it just makes them even stronger.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's important to like, I know they gave up ample yardage on the ground to Nick Chubb. I think he had 124 yards rushing. And then the Browns in general, in total, had like 219 yards. So to have the performance that they did against Dalvin Cook, and yes, you can argue that, Sean Mannion might lean heavily on the run game because he hadn't thrown an NFL touchdown prior to that. But his longest attempt of the night was 6 yards. He had 13 yards rushing. And when you think about, I wish I had the person that posted the stat in front of me. I feel bad, but the Packers are like the only team in the NFL that has 82 missed tackles. Every other team in the NFL has over 100 missed tackles on the season.
Wow.
So for the Packers to be that sure at tackling is something that we've complained about for so long, it feels like. And this defense is just, they rally to the ball. They're making tackles. Even like the Kevin King stop with Conklin when he just kind of forced him out of bounds without giving up the first down. These are all such impressive things that it feels like we haven't seen. And going up against like, whether it's the Cowboys offense where you've got 3 number 1 wide receivers and Zeke and Pollard in the backfield, or you're looking at, the Cardinals coming in with Edmonds and Connor, like you feel more confident about this Packers defense after the performance they had against the Vikings than we probably did against the Ravens or the Browns.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, back to fundamentals, which I think that all goes back to coaching is, Joe Barry obviously came in and has like hammered that home. It's funny you say about Kevin King because one thing that my dad always said to me when we were growing up watching football was sidelines another defender, right? Like you push him out of bounds, it's done. So use the sidelines to your advantage. I have to say I appreciate a little bit like some of the adjustments Joe Barry has made. And again, like they played their brand of defense, right? Like you didn't see them like stack the box when Sean Mannion was obviously going to quarterback sneak on 4th and 1 or 4th and 2, whatever it was. But there were definitely adjustments, like you said, like Kevin King played really nice in that dime role. And I don't think we've seen him really rotate in that much like that. He was rushing a lot more. I think it would be really fun to see Za'Darius back in this defense just because, oh God, you could just like rush 5 like every drop back. But I appreciate the adjustments from Joe, because that makes me, again, as a fan sitting on my couch watching, waiting to see what they do in the playoffs, feel a little bit more confident that he can make like very specific pregame and mid-game adjustments in the playoffs, depending on what opposing offenses are showing him.
Yeah, and one of the things that, we've talked about, and you specifically, have mentioned this quite a bit, is that, this defense is very good at being opportunistic, but you cannot rely on turnovers. And yes, they had 4 turnovers against the Browns, but then you go into the Vikings game and they don't get a turnover, and they still had that kind of dominant performance. So it's nice to know, and this is when you need to know that your defense can win, whether, you are forcing turnovers or whether you're just relying purely on the guys that you have on the field. And I think that was, I just really, it was the most complete game of the season by a wide margin, I think.
You read my mind. I was going to say that the Packers won without winning the turnover battle. Obviously, they didn't turn the ball over either. But again, I feel like you and I have been saying this for all season. It's the Trevon Diggs, like debate, right? Like, is he really that good, or is he just like an opportunistic turnover machine, right? And I think, like, yes, it's amazing, and I hope the Packers have 5 interceptions a game, but you have to be able to beat teams without relying on that. So yes, I completely agree. Okay, really wonderful complete game. Do we talk about David Moore on special teams? Is that even worth it? It was good. Good job. We found a punt returner finally. I thought EQ did pretty nicely when he got put in there as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's fun to see positive yardage out of special teams, going into the playoffs. That'll matter. I loved that Aaron, in his post-game presser said that he met him on the sideline. Like, he was like, "Hey, oh, you're David." And then he went out there and, had the biggest return of the season. And he's like, "Oh, okay." But yeah, I mean, special teams is fixing the things that we were really concerned about in the beginning of the season. So it really just, I don't think that you can look at any phase of this team right now and say that they're trending in the wrong direction, especially when you think about Randall Cobb coming back, maybe not against the Lions, but for the playoffs. Sounds like David is practicing this week, Bakhtiari. Yeah, I mean, Rodgers was incredibly optimistic post-game that they could get just about everybody back. And, we don't know what that necessarily means for Za'Darius and Josh Myers. Matt LaFleur wouldn't give updates on that, but Jair, Bakhtiari, Randall Cobb, it sounds like those 3 you can pretty much lock in as being back at some point.
And I think the best part of that is that I think this team can make it all the way without any of those guys coming back.
Yeah, and we've seen them do it.
Yeah. So speaking of looking ahead a little bit and feeling like complete game, momentum, everything's like trending in the right direction, there is another regular season game, right? This is now an 18-week season, which is, we can have that debate whether it's, good or not, 1 bye, doesn't matter. Packers have 2. The Packers have been asked about, Matt LaFleur has been asked about sitting versus starting. And I do think it's a really interesting discussion. And you and I actually feel very similarly, surprise, surprise, about starting versus sitting. Curious what everyone in the chat thinks about this. I think you and I feel similarly in that rust is never good. I think some live reps are really important. You just don't get enough in practice. So I'm of the camp, like, play your starters the first quarter. Maybe you do the preseason thing where they play like 2 series, like whatever it is. I think like at least 2 drives are necessary. I wouldn't even mind if they played a full half. And then the second half, right, you give Jordan Love that time and those reps and everybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think, and Matt LaFleur kind of said it too. Like he said, if there's a guy that doesn't want to play, we're not going to play him. Like we're not going to make anybody go out there. But after the game, Roger said this was the first time he didn't need a shot post or pregame. For his toe. His toe's feeling better. Devontae said he wants to go out there for a little bit, and I think I know that there was like a narrative that the Packers weren't good coming out of bye weeks because they had lost in the regular season after byes, but they had bye weeks the first two, times they'd been in the playoffs, and they won both of those divisional games. So I don't think that we can really call it,
Yeah.
some type of like boogeyman for them. But I do think that there's a rust element there where you do want to give them an opportunity, especially, if David can come back or Jair, you can get guys back and give them a couple reps, even like let David come out there for a series or two against, I guess a well-controlled game would be a way to put it, where it doesn't necessarily have any outcome. I don't see the harm in that, really.
I agree with you completely. And I think that there's something to be said for clearly like LaFleur and the staff are listening to the players and hearing what the players have to say about their own bodies and what they would prefer to do. It's a long time. It's a long time to be off until a divisional round game. You don't want to be cold. I will say that Matt LaFleur's tenure in Green Bay, I think he's done a really nice job of like balancing rest versus reps. And so I trust that whatever they decide to do will probably be the right one.
I do have a question for you about this, just because, I mean, I'm curious. So we know this game means absolutely nothing. The Packers have locked up the number one seed. Whether or not the starters play, let's say the starters play for a half and they just look awful. Do you have any concern if the Packers come out just really flat in the last game of the season, knowing it means nothing?
It's a really interesting question.
Like, what if that's the product you put on the field then before the playoffs? Instead of just resting, riding your high from the Vikings, you're like, oh, shoot. Like, we come out and just stall, and there's missed tackles everywhere. And it's like, is there any concern then that you're regressing from the really good stuff you put on tape against the Vikings? Or do you think it's like, well, they knew it didn't mean anything anyway?
I haven't even thought about that because I'm not even worried that that's
Because, I mean,
I think then you keep them out there. And then you say, you
go work for it.
Yeah, work
Dan
for
Campbell.
it. Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't mean winning necessarily, but I see what you mean, like just not playing their best ball. I don't know. I mean, Matt LaFleur said this week, like we're preparing like this is a normal week, and we're not changing the mindset. We're not changing any of the preparation, any of the practice. So hopefully that's not the case. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I love the comments talking about how it's the Lions, so it won't happen. Hey, those Lions beat the Cardinals. They
I
did
was
us
gonna
all a
say the
favor,
Lions
guys.
play hard.
But no, I mean, I think that, you have to approach it like it's any given Sunday, just because you don't want to ride too high, and you don't want to kind of fall back on your laurels and think like, well, we know what got us here. We're all set. So I
Yeah.
think I don't think that's going to happen. I was just genuinely curious, like if there would be any like, oh, that wasn't what we wanted, or maybe we shouldn't have played the starters.
So are we looking for anything from the Packers in this Lions game?
I guess
Besides
looking
not coming out flat, apparently.
To me, it's seeing what Rodgers does to lock up the MVP. Some heroics, some theatrics from 12. Devontae breaking some records.
Right.
The receiving yards,
22 yards, right?
22 yards. Yeah, 15-19 is Jordy's, and then. Yeah, I mean, I know there's some guys that have some incentives regarding like, whether it's snap percentage played, or there's some Preston can make some money this week if he gets another couple sacks. So I'm sure those guys will maybe want to be out there for those reasons. But I
Yeah.
think honestly, I'm just excited to see Jordan Love again, because I thought against the Chiefs when he was getting pressure in his face every single down, we just didn't really get a very good holistic view of what he could maybe be someday.
I agree with you. Real quick before I answer that, to those asking in the chat, yes, you can send super chats. We encourage them. I am very excited to see Jordan Love in a different environment. I actually thought he looked way better and way more comfortable against the Vikings at the end of that game. Had some just the more he is able to be out there, the better it is for him. And we said, right, didn't we say preseason, like the goal is lock up the one seed, make the last week not count and have Jordan Love go out and play. And that's exactly what the Packers have done. I mean, they put themselves in like this front office must be so pleased with themselves because this is the position that they want to be in. And definitely, I mean, obviously a much more even opponent. I do think it would be very fun if it's Tim Boyle versus Jordan Love.
Love it.
Both of Aaron Rodgers' backups playing against each other. That's a little heartwarming. Because I'm sure that they were buds last season. So
yeah, I mean, I think too, like, if you're talking about getting a really, like, I guess your best view of Jordan Love so far, maybe you could argue that it was the Chiefs game because he got the starter reps, to be able to prepare for that. But think about the games he's come in for. It was the Saints when they were getting blown out and he's, they're down like 38-3 and he's like, well, I don't want to go out there. Like, and he's got to take those reps. And then against the Vikings, the game was already kind of put away. So you don't really, at that point want to let him go, take deep shots because you're just kind of trying to run the clock out. So it'll be nice to see him get like a full half where it's obviously low stakes and just let him go run the offense.
I agree with you. Someone commented, congratulations on winning Maggie's fantasy championship, Perri. Thank you so much. I did win my very first fantasy championship this season. Sean Rose, yes, taking back what is ours. Love it. Okay, we've got some time now, and I know we kind of want to dive into what this NFC is shaping up to be. So all we know at the moment, right, is that the Packers have the 1 seed. So it looks like Tampa Bay, Cowboys, Cardinals, and Rams have all at least clinched a playoff spot. And then there's 2 more up for grabs right now, which I believe is the Eagles and
Niners and Saints.
Niners and Saints are fighting for it. Yeah. Jeff Ness, thank you. If Love lights it up, it could affect what happens in the offseason. Maybe. But we're going to get to that in the offseason because right now we are playoff focused. But you are not wrong. More tape is better for everybody. So Eagles, Saints, Niners are the questions. Really interesting, like string of games this weekend. We will do our game picks later on. How are you feeling? Like, okay, ideal scenario, I guess. Then, like, what's the ideal scenario for the Packers?
I don't know. I'm normally like big on revenge tours, and then those haven't really worked out very well the last couple years. So I don't necessarily think that I want one of those this year. I think I tweeted like as a dumb joke after the week 1 loss. I think I said you can't go 14-3 without losing 3 games. So there you go, Saints. There was one of them. But then the other one I said was like, oh, wouldn't it be so funny now if the Saints come to Lambeau Field for the NFC Championship game? And I mean, I would be significantly less worried about this Saints team. Now that they might not even make the playoffs, but I think the wild card, nobody wants to play the Eagles right now. They're a really fun kind of team. The 49ers are coming into their own, even though Jimmy G, I think needs some surgery on the thumb. It might be Trey Lance, but the Packers have, faced off against, the Bucks are a common opponent for them at this point, even though they didn't play this season. They beat the Cardinals, they beat the Rams. It's not really a lot of like unseen opponents really here. I think the Cowboys would probably be the trickiest for them at this point.
Yeah, the Cowboys are hot and cold to me, and I think coming into Lambeau might be a challenge for them. Todd in the chat just said, as it stands right now, the Packers' first game is going to be versus either Dallas or Arizona. Or if San Francisco, Philly, or New Orleans, whoever that is, gets into wild card round and wins, they obviously come up to Green Bay. So I think that the ideal scenario is to have, the 6th or 7th seed win, take out some bigger opponent, come up to Lambeau. That feels unlikely. So it will likely be Dallas or Arizona. I think Dallas is the tougher opponent at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it was a friend of the show, Mina Kimes, that was talking about, how some of these teams match up, and the Dallas front is, I think, where a lot of these struggles are. The secondary, I think Devontae and Rodgers can pick apart just about anybody at this point. But if you're looking at like really aggressive front four, that's like the bread and butter of this Cowboys defense. And, yes, you could have David Bakhtiari back, and the offensive line has played well, haven't allowed a sack in the last couple weeks. But still, I mean, if you're talking about the best way to rattle Aaron Rodgers is to generate a ton of pressure, I think the Cowboys really at this point are doing that better than anybody. It was a recipe for the Bucs all last season.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I would say that the Packers offensive line has been holding up pretty well against pressure. But again, you look at this and you just say having David Bakhtiari back is really the answer to a lot of things. Not to say Yash has not played well. He has played very well. But I agree with you. I think to me, I think it's the Cowboys offense that poses the biggest threat than anything. They of course just lost Michael Gallup, which is a huge blow as their third wide receiver, but they still have Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. I don't think Zeke is the same player that he was, but Tony Pollard certainly can turn on the Jets. Like they've got it. They've got it all. And
they have a good tight end in Schultz too.
Every
position is loaded.
Every position's covered. And Dak is an incredible quarterback. So that would be, to me, I think the biggest challenge. I agree with you. I think Rodgers and Adams can face off against, like they make plays against anybody. But that would be interesting. I think a common opponent would be the best case scenario, either Arizona or the Rams, not just because the Packers beat both of them this season, but because, again, they played already. There's more tape. There's a better understanding. And, the Arizona would now be the home field advantage.
With Tay back, which would be a lot of fun too, since he didn't get those opportunities that first time on Thursday night. So, yeah, I mean, I know we're not really talking about the AFC at this point, but I love when there's new teams in the playoffs. And I know everybody says that about the Packers. If you're not a Packer fan, like nobody wants to see the Packers in the playoffs every season. But the fact that you're looking at so many AFC teams too that have either never been or never won a Super Bowl, it's going to be pretty easy to root for whoever I think clinches the AFC. Yeah, you got Bengals, Chargers, Titans. Well, Chargers, if they get in at this point, they're kind of sitting with the potential. But yeah, it's just, it's a really fun batch to be able to root for on that conference.
It is. Okay, so we're getting updates from everyone in the chat. So nice of you. Thank you for Googling this while we are live. The Eagles have, according to ESPN, the Eagles have clinched a spot. Thank you, Evan. Jeff says the 49ers are in with a win. So the Saints are on the outside looking in. So if the Niners lose and the Saints win, Saints are in. If Niners win, they are in. So that is, honestly, if the Saints get in after the season that they've had, like, wow, good for Sean Payton.
Don't the Niners play the Rams this week? Haven't they beat them like the last 5 times they've played or something weird like that?
Let's look. I think you're correct.
I just know it's it's a tough matchup for the Niners.
Niners at Rams this weekend.
Especially because the Rams are still technically fighting for a home game, right? Their division's still kind of up for grabs. Nobody clinched it yet.
Nobody clinched the division yet.
It'll be a good game.
Yeah, it will be a good game. Matt Mamba in the chat. Have we overlooked the possibility that Matt LaFleur's handsomeness is serving as a distraction for opposing teams? I have not overlooked that potential fact. No.
Yeah.
What say you, Maggie?
I mean,
or AJ size. Yes. Ted65, thank you for the super chat. Enjoy the show. Well, I appreciate that. Also, the Eagles have clinched a playoff spot because of that Packers win.
Yeah, the Eagles and Vikings were, I think, vying for one. And then when the Eagles won and the Packers beat the Vikings, then the Vikings couldn't make it anymore. So sad.
Oops. Well, I think the Packers have put themselves in a really nice position. I'm not going into this playoffs as cocky as I was last season. I mean, the Packers were best offense in the league, but I do feel like this team is better positioned to win these games. And I say that because they have started majority of games down, and the defense can actually now overcome a deficit, which is something they couldn't do before. They don't spiral when they get down even 2 scores, which is, again, something that they've been able to overcome. The adversity that they faced, playing without key starters all season, it just feels like a more formative team that's ready to take on the challenge of the playoffs. Also, this is maybe superstitious of me. I'm not a superstitious person, but
Just a little stitious.
just a little stitious. But the world like tends to work in threes, and you see a lot of times teams in their third year with coaches, in their third year with new quarterbacks, finally like get past that. It just feels like that's the time frame. So we're here in the third year of Matt LaFleur, second NFC championship game, third NFC championship game, sorry.
Second at home.
Second at home, third in total. Just feels like the year to get over that hump. There's like nothing behind that. Like I have no actual stats or facts. I could probably go and search for them, like that threes, but something about the third time's a charm.
Well, and I think too, like if you look at just the growth of the team, we kind of touched on it a little bit already, but in 2019, they were just blown out by the Niners in the regular season. And then you're like, oh, really? Like, oh, they have to go back there and just make it close. And then they get run all over. And then in 2020, we're talking about a team that, has the best offense in football, but you don't trust the defense. They go down to Tampa and they just get blown out in the regular season. And you're like, oh, shoot. And then they come to, and you're like, no, it's okay. It's at home. But it just doesn't pan out. Outside of the Saints game, which I think everybody can agree at this point was kind of a weird anomaly to start the season, the Packers have won the games that I think we could have expected them to lose. They beat the Cardinals really on a short week. They beat the Rams. Yes, they dropped to the Chiefs. Aaron Rodgers didn't play in that game. They dropped a close one to the Vikings, but the Bengals, who they could literally see in a Super Bowl, they beat in overtime. So a lot of those games where you were like holding your breath thinking that this was going to be kind of the game for the Packers, they've overcome so much of that.
Yeah.
And I think it feels like this is a team with the adversity, with the next man up mentality that can get over the hump, unlike we've seen, from the other two iterations of this Packers team.
It's the calm, cool, and collected like vibe of this team. They're like very quietly confident, just go into every week with that like very quiet dominance. And I just can't envision, we said it last season, but I feel it even more this season. I can't envision a team that's going to let this second chance slip through their fingers. I can't envision it. But I will say, I think like the difference this year has been the defense. The defense is a lot more stout, trustworthy. They're stopping. They shut out Russell Wilson. Like they've stepped up this season in a way that I think they're going to be able to beat teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, not that the offense is a concern when you're talking about the way that they're putting up 30 plus points outside of the Browns game in like 5 of their last 6 games or whatever the numbers end up being. But when you had the number one offense in football last season, the defense was like are we sure what could happen? And yeah, I mean, this just feels like the most complete team. And it's like you said, you haven't had Jair for most of the season. You had Z for some of the Saints game. You haven't had David. Getting Randall Cobb back would be huge. It's just, we said it early in the show. It's a team that you don't want to get your hopes up really too far yet because we've seen what happens in the letdown stings quite a bit. But it is a team that it's hard to find their weakness at this point. And I think that's exciting, especially because you could argue that one of the weaknesses the last 2 seasons was the inexperience of the head coach. And now you're talking about the winningest head coach through 3 seasons in NFL history, likely coach of the year, or should be in the conversation if he's not, the candidate. And I think all of those experiences, as much as they do great things for the Packers roster, they also do great things for the coaching staff.
Yeah. Brandy asked a really interesting question, and she said, do you think Barry is holding out on plays for the playoffs? For example, safety, cornerback blitzes, etc. Well, I would. You know how much I love a DB blitz. That's a very good question. I definitely think that there is something to both LaFleur probably and Barry having some things up their sleeves for the playoffs. But I think the way that this team is playing is the team that we're going to see. There's always, how Matt LaFleur rolls with the wrinkles off of looks that he's already given to kind of trick opposing defenses. I'm sure there are some things, but I would say expect to see, your base nickel defense from Barry, Kenny, Lowry, Preston, Rashawn. I'm not sure that there's going to be a ton that looks different, but maybe a handful of fun blitzes in there.
Don't forget about Jesus in the post, too.
Jesus in the post. Sure. If you don't understand that reference, it's a Rasul Douglas quote from his most recent press conference about the way that he jumps routes, and that if nobody's back there to cover him, like Amos or Savage, he hopes Jesus is in the post to cover him. Very funny. That's your new favorite quote.
It absolutely is. I loved it so much. But yeah, I mean, before we wrap, I do think that, like Adrian Amos said it post game, these are guys, Devontae, Kenny Clark, a couple names that, come to mind right away, are guys that have been to the NFC Championship game so many times that at some point you just want to get over that hump. And Adrian Amos said it, like you don't get these kinds of opportunities to be the number one seed, to host playoff games at home. And it's definitely something that they're emphasizing in the locker room, where they will do everything in their power to not let it slip through their fingers twice. And I know, they didn't want it to slip through their fingers the first time either. It's not like they rolled over or they didn't plan as best they should, but the guys aren't taking for granted what this opportunity will mean.
Yep. And let's just hope no Tom Brady. Just someone knock him out before he gets up there. Thank you all so much for joining. As always, we appreciate you. We'll be back at the beginning of February, so we could be previewing the Super Bowl. That's probably that.
At least recapping the NFC Championship game.
At least recapping the NFC Championship game beginning of February. We love all of your fun chatter in the chat. This is going to be our episode, so we're going to download this and put it on Spotify, etc., for you to listen to. If you missed part of it, it will be there. We'll also record our game predictions as usual, so you can see who ends up winning, because I think I'm ahead right now.
You are.
Thank you. And what else do we need to tell the people, Maggie?
I don't know. You can get 20% off your order from Manscaped, the sponsor of our show, with the code PWSS20. That is always fun. Big fans of them. Their cologne smells really good. It is, I almost said almost Valentine's Day. It's not really almost Valentine's Day, but if you need something in the next month and a half, PWSS20.
Yeah, you can do that. You can also follow us on Twitter at Perri_Goldstein. You can follow Maggie on Twitter at Maggie J. Loney, at PWSS Podcast. Pax what she said on Twitter, Twitch and Instagram. There are too many places. Of course, if you're in here, you are already following She Said TV, but if somehow you are not, you should definitely be doing that. Pay no mind to the intern making the memes at Tyler Herrick. And again, thank you all so much for joining. As always, we are going to head into week 18 feeling good. Packers are the 1 seed, and it is on to the divisional round of the playoffs.
Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.